a great opportunity. I've been looking to come down here for some time now, but for a lot of different reasons, contractual and business and otherwise, I haven't been able to make it. I'm glad I got down here for your spring, right, which is what, only 95 degrees? I'm glad we didn't, Lindsay, I'm glad we didn't pick August, because I don't think I would have made it out of the hotel room. Okay, I've been told there's a box over here, this invisible box with the two blue lines.
Right.
And if I get out of that box, they're going to push me back into the box, right? So I'm going to
Everybody
try.
hates the blue line.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to talk about out-of-the-box stuff inside of the box, all right? Okay, so we're going to talk about leading innovation, right? And by the way, this material here, you are my guinea pigs today, and I mean that affectionately, because this is part of a training course that we're developing for the folks at NAVAIR, AD, and WD. And in fact, Lindsay was kind enough to change the set of slides that we're using here today, because just earlier this week I had the first round with them and did a lot of modifications to the material based upon their input and their feedback. So I would appreciate your input and feedback today, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 6 key concepts. By the way, if you don't know American Sign Language, this means 6. This is not some ethnic gesture from somebody from New Jersey, okay? So we're going to talk about 6 concepts today, which I think, if you take them to heart, and if you take some actions on them, you'll find you can make a huge difference. In fact, you'll find there are 6 slides dispersed throughout the presentation that are questions for you to think about after the presentation. Questions for you to consider when you're sitting around with your pals, when you're sitting around with people that challenge the way you think, when you're sitting around with somebody who's not your own age, all right, or hasn't had your experience and will have a different point of view, all right? Okay, so these are the 6 concepts we're going to talk about. Number 1, I want you to think about a new model for innovation, a new mental model, right? And I'll explain to you a little later what I mean by a mental model, but I think you'll grasp it pretty quickly. It's how we think about something, right? Because the mind is this very powerful association engine, right? And depending upon the mental model you have, it will allow you to see some things, and it will prevent you from seeing other things, right? So just a slight change in your mental model will make a huge difference in how you view innovation and the world around you, okay? Second thing, I want to talk to you about something called the innovation backbone, because once I hopefully convince you that you want to look at innovation as a social process and as a network process, right? Then I'm going to use a couple of biological metaphors to show you that there's some key things about your network for innovation that if you grasp them and if you manage them and lead them, okay, you can make a huge difference in your capacity for innovation. And I don't have to tell you that in the complex world we're living in, and with the competition that we're going to be getting from China and India and other places, okay, and with the different forms of warfare, classic and asymmetric, okay, along with the fact that you're looking down the throat of the sequester, we can't do things the way we've been doing. We've got to do them differently, right? Either that, or you're going to be the last generation in the military, right? And we know that's not going to be acceptable. All right, the third thing, propagation of knowledge. Because what I want you to understand is I want you to look at innovation broadly. Innovation happens everywhere. It's not just S&T or R&D, right? Innovation happens in acquisition. Innovation happens in the way we service those things that we acquire, right? And how we maintain them and how we use them. What are the concepts for using those new technologies, okay? So innovation in general is the generation and propagation of new knowledge, right, that has value and that changes our behavior patterns. And that last one's really important because the collection of behavior patterns that all the people in this audience, in this organization exhibit, that's your culture, right? Change your behavior pattern and you'll change your culture. I mean, it was interesting, I was recently reading the IBM annual report for 2012, and my last assignment there was in Watson Research Center, okay? Now, when I was there back in the late 80s, early 90s, I left in 91, Watson was full of physicists, chemists, electrical engineers, solid-state engineers and physicists, okay? There's this huge transformation now. Now they're full of people that are mathematicians, right? Data analysts, right? Because where's their business now? It's in big data. It's in analyzing all that information. It's in service. They make more money from the services division now than the hardware division, right? In fact, they make more money from licensing their patents now than they make from the hardware division. It's pretty amazing. People with intellectual property, okay? So they're changing, and I want to convince you that you need to look at something called your innovation genotype, right? Just like the genotype determines what an animal is like, how fast it can run, how tall it can jump, how ferocious it is, you have an innovation genotype. And it will define the types of knowledge that you can generate in the future. And if you don't plan for the genotype that you need for the Navy after tomorrow, you've lost, okay? Next thing I want to talk to you about is creating cultures of innovation, right? Culture is this mythical thing that everybody talks about, and quite frankly, BS is about quite a lot, right? But if you boil it down, what culture is all about is the collective behavior patterns of an organization. And I want to show you how the metaphors you use and how the policies you implement can change your culture for the better and for the worse. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about disruptive innovation. Because while culture may be the most powerful thing you have, facing the future enemy, facing the unknowns, okay? Culture can also be your Achilles heel. Because there's a human phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. And if I believe in something so strong, right, and some other data comes along that opposes that belief, I won't see it, right? And all you got to do is look at our political process over the last decade, and you can see what cognitive dissonance is all about, okay, in spades. Next slide, please. Okay, so real quick, we're living in a very complex world. This is not new news to you, right? Just page through there's 4 drop-downs, right? We've got epidemics, you know. We've got blackouts, okay? We've got financial crises. We've got toppled governments, okay? And when you think about that, it's all little things that started. It's a switch failing somewhere in the network, right? It's somebody tweeting somebody else about some injustice that was done in our society, right? And it's these little things that when they're embedded in a network, in a large social network, a large infrastructure network, electrical network, power grid, financial network, those small things all of a sudden cause these emergent behaviors, these black swans that we could never predict, okay? Complexity is not complicated. It's more than complicated. Complicated, you can break it down into its component pieces, and you can determine what has to be fixed so that you don't have that failure again. Complexity is, this is a living system. There's so many interactions that when I think I fixed one thing, lo and behold, what I've done is created a dozen other problems. It's all these unanticipated consequences, which is one of the causes of disruption. By the way, in this world, we're operating in, the next slide, please, this. How many are familiar with this? Don't you just love this process? Right? At ONR, this chart is up on a wall in one of the conference rooms, and it consumes the entire wall. And even at that size, you still need to put your glasses on. I need to put my glasses on to read it, right? And heaven forbid if you actually said, I understand this process, because it's time to have you locked up. Right? Nobody understands this entire process, okay? Next slide. And by the way, in this crazy complex world, what does everybody expect of us? To deliver more sophisticated innovations wherever it is, whether it's at R&D, S&T, in-service, acquisition. It never gets simpler. It only gets more complex, right? So, next slide. What I want to tell you is I think it's time for a change. And the analogy I use is Cold War economies, right? Who managed their economy this way? Tops down, 5-year plan. Sound familiar? Right? The Russians, okay? How do we manage our economy? Right? We had an open capitalistic economy. It's like a network, right? Yes, you set rules. Yes, you set guidelines. Yes, you set laws and stuff like this, okay? But everybody could try to achieve something, to network with somebody else to get the work done, to produce a product that the customer wants. And so what I want to try to convince you of is that we need to move, right, from managing hierarchies to managing and leading networks. Now, at this point in time, somebody should say, does this guy know who he's talking to? This is the Navy, right? We're all about command and control of hierarchies. Okay, you're not going to throw it away. I know you're not, right? You don't have to throw it away because you're smart enough to live with multiple systems, because you're smart enough to know when one theory of management applies and when another theory of management applies, okay? And I want to convince you, for the sake of innovation, that what you want to do is move a little bit more to the side of networks. So let's take a look at, and this is the first concept I want you to grasp, the network model of innovation. Next slide. One more. So here's a simplified network. And what I want to convince you of is that innovation is the generation and propagation of new knowledge, right, that has value, enough value, so that you change your behavior patterns, okay? And with this definition of innovation, it can be anything. It could be that new jet fighter. It could be that new unmanned vehicle. It could be that new submarine, whatever it happens to be. It could be that new acquisition process that reduces cost, reduces time, and ensures better buy, okay? It could be that new in-service process, which makes sure that the thing that we purchased is up and running for our warriors and doesn't fail ever, okay? So what I want you to understand is innovation can happen anywhere. You'll see a slight bias in my talk towards research, right? Why? Because that's where I was asked to look when we did this 2-year study for the Office of Naval Research, right? But I want to tell you that innovation is everywhere. In fact, I want to show you, see, I'm out of the box now. And he's over here, he's panicking. He said, oh my God. So he's thinking, what's the new process I could have? You know, could I have a stun gun that would get him back in the box over here? You know, something like that. Or maybe, better yet, we could get a couple more cameras and we could have a bigger box so we could walk around wherever we want. Okay, so there's process innovation. All right, so what do we got here? So if we take a look at this, let's see if I can walk, talk, and use 2 hands. If we take a look at this, what I want to try to convince you of is, look, it's all about, did that battery? Oh, here it is. It's all about people, A, B, C, and D over here, right? These are our creative people. You have a lot of them. You hire the best people in the world, right? And in fact, now you can do a much better job at it because there's no jobs on the outside, so it's easier to hire them. Okay? But you're going to put them together in a network. You're going to connect them together, right? And so when you think about it, the individuals possess the tacit knowledge, right? They have it up here. Okay? And if you're familiar with the work of Nonaka on the knowledge creating company, you know, he'll talk about the fact that we need to engage people in a dialogue. A dialogue where I tell you something that was in my head that you didn't know. It wasn't in a report somewhere. And you tell me something else that was in your head that I didn't know. And all of a sudden, one of us says, wow, a light goes on. And you get this aha moment. And you realize that you've got a new idea, a new concept, all right? About a new process, a new technology, a new something, okay? Now, networks, the only magic about networks is they enable connectivity between those individuals. That's it. That's all they're doing. Networks can be physical. You and I share coffee at the same time, the same day in the cafeteria, okay? Networks can be electronic. We exchange stuff by email or by Facebook or some other thing, okay? Right? But they're only there for the purpose of connecting those people, okay? Challenges provide the motivation. Why do I want to talk to you about what I know, right? Because we've got a challenge to solve, and we're motivated to solve that. And by the way, you can talk all you want about monetary rewards and promotions and stuff like that. That's all good. But a lot of studies have shown as soon as you get it, within 60 days, it doesn't matter anymore, right? Because you've now got a bigger lifestyle, and you need all that money you just got, right? So it's really problems and motivators, because deep down, that's why we are here. That's why we're doing this. We're dedicated. And the Navy more so than industry, right? You're here for a reason, right? You believe in what our country is about, and you're fighting for that, right? So the last thing that I say is extremely important is trust, okay? Because trust determines your willingness to share it. You can be motivated, you can be connected, you can have all this tacit knowledge, but if you don't trust me, you're not going to share it with me, all right? And by the way, our policies really impact that. I was in IBM in, I'm going to tell you when, well, you know already, I'm an old man. Okay, so, yeah. So when I was at IBM, it was a company where you had a job for life, right? Everybody trusted everybody. You walked up to me and said, show me your engineering notebook, and I'd give you all my data, and vice versa. Because you didn't care, because it was for the good of Mother IBM, right? In 1991, they had their first downside, where this job for life idea just went out the window, okay? And past 1991, I left at that point in time. They offered everybody 2 years worth of pay if you could leave. And I said, what the heck, for 2 years worth of pay? I'll figure out what to do with my life, right? And I became a serial entrepreneur. It's kind of like a serial killer, same thing. And a lot of similarities. But what I found out when I went back is that IBM has started this process every year of ranking everybody. And every year the bottom 10% got kicked out, right? Well, nobody shared their data with anybody else. There was no trust anymore. If I share my data with you, you might be ranked one above me and I'm out the door. So here's a simple policy that on the books, financially, looks really, really good, right? But what it did to innovation was absolutely terrible. IBM today announced they're going through another round of downsizing. They're going to go for another 6,000 people. Okay. All right, just click it one time, please. So what I want you to know is that new knowledge is generated and propagates at the speed of trust, right, in a connected and motivated network of creative people. It's a social process. By the way, if anybody doesn't believe this stuff, you want to stop me, please do. I have no troubles in trying to drift back and forth. I have the power of the mic, so I'm all set. Next slide.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Except in this case.
The challenge is, how do we do that in a hierarchical organization?
Yes.
Right? That's how we are.
Yes. So you're right. So you have this culture, this command and control hierarchical organization, And having served in Vietnam, I'm 100% behind that in the battlefield, okay? I don't want the basketball team in the battlefield. I want command and control in the battlefield, all right? When somebody says, take that hill, I don't want to know that my buddies have decided they're going to go after a different hill. I want to know that we're all going after the same hill, right? However, you've got another part, which is developing the processes and the procedures and the tools and the technologies and the concepts, right, that are supporting the warfighter. So that when he goes up that hill, he's got an advantage, an unfair competitive advantage, right? That part of your organization has to be managed a little differently. And I think it's going to be extremely hard for the Navy because, sir, what happens is leaders like yourself are transferred between command and control positions and then managing and leading something like a research organization, right? And that requires you to be able to do a mental mind shift that is not easy, not easy. I think, part of all the interviews we did of the top innovators in the Navy, part of their complaint was the fact that when you get a good man or girl or lady leading an organization like this, unfortunately, 2 years later, you're gone, right? Somebody else comes in and you all start over. So what kind of dysfunctional behavior does that breed? What it breeds is the behavior that says, well, I don't like him or her, therefore I'll lead them. Yeah. Right? And so that's sort of the policies and procedures you're going to see that are going to that you have to think about to change your culture if you really want to make a difference. All right? And I know there's good reasons for it. I was on IBM's replacement list, and every year or 2 years I'd be transferred to another assignment so that I get more experience, right? Never realizing what I was doing to the people beneath me as I came in and wreaked havoc for a year or 2 years, and then left and went on to something else. All right? Okay. A couple of years ago, the President's initiative on innovation looked at the metrics. And what's kind of interesting is identified 4 generations of metrics. The first one, measure the inputs. Right? What's my R&D expenditure, number of personnel, capital equipment, et cetera. That's the inputs, right? Then they said, well, no, that's not good enough. What are we getting for all these inputs? So the second generation, which is in the 70s and 80s, started measuring the outputs. Patents, publications, right? Products and stuff like that. That was great, but still think about it. What are you doing? If you draw a box around research and you say, I'm measuring the input, measuring the output, you haven't tackled the big problem, which is in that box. It's the people, it's the network inside that box, right? You see them starting to make a difference when they go into the 1990s when they do surveying and indexing and benchmarking, right? Because they're now comparing their black box to everybody else's black box. And they're asking the questions, well, why does that person's black box work better than mine? And they start delving in. And the last generation here, which is still embryonic, is measuring the intangibles, the tacit knowledge that people have, right? The networks, how are they connected? How are they working together? The system dynamics, because it is a dynamic system, right? Generating new knowledge is a very dynamic process, okay? All right, and why is it important? Because you can only manage what you measure, and the corollary, what you measure is what you get, all right? And very often, if we're not careful about how we measure things, we get behaviors that we never would have anticipated, really aberrant behaviors. Right? I know I managed a 300-person programming organization at one point in my career, and when we measured them by lines of code, we got lines of code. Worst software ever developed, but we got millions of lines of code. Okay, next. All right, this is one form of an innovation network. And what have I got here? What I've got is every blue circle is a person, a human being, a creative individual, right? Every gray line is an indication that that person and the other person at the other end of that line have invented together, right? Now, why did we choose patents? We chose patents because it was readily available, right? Turns out, when we wanted to look at other markers of innovation, publications, technical reports, funds flow, etc., you're not going to believe this, but to get it in the Navy was impossible, all right? Publications data, oh yeah, I've got this three-ring binder over here with these forms that were signed and filled out. Where's the database? Okay. Funds flow, we've got ERP. Should be able to get any data you want to get, right? Not so easy, right? So now we're on some other efforts to try and get some of these other markers of innovation. But the one we could get easily was patents. I know it's not perfect. The Navy isn't necessarily interested in doing a lot of patenting as commercial organizations are, but you still have a lot of patents. In fact, I was talking to the Admiral earlier. One of the things that amazes me is, IBM makes $2 billion a year on their patent portfolio, licensing it. I mean, I'm not saying you're going to make $2 billion, but I bet you can make a couple $100 million real easy and pour that back into research, pour that back into innovation, right? You don't do it. Why? All right? Okay, so now take a look at this. What do you see? This is 562 inventors, 1,167 inventors over a 5-year time period. Look at the structure here, right? Look at the clusters. Look at this cluster on the left side here, another cluster up here, a big one over here, right? Look at all the little, well, going out of the box. Sorry, guys. The guy in the strange voice is talking now to the slide. All right, look at these over here. They're all separate, right? They're isolated. They're not connected. okay? Now, this organization happens to have quite a bit of connectivity. I've seen other organizations that are an order of magnitude worse, and I'll tell you a little more about that. Now, notice something else. Notice this individual here, okay? Take that person out, and what's the connectivity between this part and this part? A little bit down here, a little bit up here. Now, when you think about connectivity as pipes, and if you think about knowledge as flow, as fluids, okay, guess what? You don't have much flow in those areas. You've got these little bridges that are restrictions, okay? So when you take a look at your innovation networks at a large topological perspective, where are your isolated components? Okay? How could you bridge them? How should you bridge them? How can you ensure those bridges are trusted? Okay? Oh, by the way, if there's a circle around by a blue dot like down here, that means that that person had a sole invention, a patent that had only that person, him or her, as the inventor on it. Okay? So patents turn out to be pretty useful. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay? And the question that I want you to think about afterwards is, what metrics would you use for your different organization? Patents aren't going to be applicable everywhere. You know, they're only going to work in certain places. Would you use funds flow? Yes, sir.
Sir, on the slide prior, you had the inventions. Were there derivative inventions off the primary invention?
Sure there were, yeah. You can get really complex with this, and you can go down multiple degrees, and you can look at forward and backward citations and everything else, and it gets very complicated very quickly.
But I mean, was the networking that was it fundamental to the derivative, or would it have occurred without the network?
That's a good question. We didn't look at, in other words, this one triggered that one, triggered that one. What we were interested in doing that plot, and you always have to choose, you know, your data set and what you're going to try to find out is, we wanted to find out who was inventing with whom. How connected were these researchers? Were they isolated little islands? For instance, if you back up one slide, for instance, this happens to be a commercial company, right? And if you take a look at this, this is a commercial company that you're all aware of and probably have bought their products, their sports gear, okay? And if you take a look at this isolated group over here, that turns out to be the golf group, right? And the leader of the golf group never wanted to talk to the guys in sneakers or clothing or other things like that, right? It was always separated, right? They didn't want that. They wanted to build those bridges, and so now they're going to go build those bridges, okay? Yes, sir?
You find, right, you found in the research that the patents can actually stifle innovation in the sense that we're talking about one company. You have another company who can do the same thing better, but they cannot because they're prevented by the patent. That allows the initial company to, yes, they can make money off of that, but they also have the temptation to rest on their laurels, at least in some of the patent spots.
So that's a good point. There's a big debate about whether it increases innovation or stifles innovation. Now, one of the things that the founding fathers wanted to do with the patent office was to grant you basically a 17-year monopoly, right? Why? Because if you're going to put all this time and money and effort into inventing something new, you need the chance to go out there and make some profit from it. Okay. So in that sense, in many cases, patents and inventions help to stimulate because you won't make those investments without that protection. Pharmaceuticals is a great example of that, okay? Now, have they abused that to the point where they use their portfolio to stifle other innovation? Yes. But you said something key. Another company can do it better. If better is by a newer, novel, non-obvious process or material or something like that, the answer is they can get a patent on that, all right? The place where we're really hurting these days is with patent trolls, all right? Like Nathan Myhrvold, who created something called Intellectual Ventures, and he's for the CTO of Microsoft, right? And he has bought up thousands and thousands of patents. He does not produce any product, okay? What he does is he sues people because his patents are being infringed by their product, all right? Originally the founding fathers never anticipated trolls, right? What they anticipated was you had two companies, both would have products, and so therefore what the natural tendency is to cross-license each other so that I can use your innovations and you can use my innovations and we both go on and make a lot of money and make the pie bigger, right? But unfortunately, there's this perturbation that's occurred. Yes?
Would not a patent troll be a form of innovation in and of itself?
Sure it is. Yeah. Now the question is, all kinds of viruses are innovations too, aren't they? They're changes in DNA structures. Not everyone is a positive virus, right? And I'm not sure that this is a positive virus with Myhrvold's company. It's making a ton of money for its investors, that's true. And if you want to look at it from an economic perspective, it's great. If you want to look at it from stifling creativity in companies, it's terrible because you can't countersue him. You can't walk in and threaten him with anything. He doesn't have a product revenue stream to threaten, all right? So there's pros and cons. No system is perfect. Okay, can we go on? Thanks. All right. So think about this. How would you measure innovation, the generation and propagation of new knowledge in your organization, right? And what could you learn from a network analysis, right? And we're going to show you some other things that we think you could learn. Next slide. Right? We want to use biological metaphor. Your backbone, right? Connects all the different parts of your body. Connects the brain, the liver, and everything else, right? So that information can travel all over the body. What's the equivalent in innovation networks? Next slide. Here it is. I don't want to get too geeky on you, but there is a measurement in networks called betweenness centrality. It's a measure for your node that says how important you are for the generation and or propagation of knowledge between other nodes other than your node. So take any two other nodes, you're between them, more often you are on the shortest path between those two nodes, any two random nodes, the higher your betweenness centrality. And what we saw here was this. The graph on the upper left is normalized betweenness centrality, 100 being high, 0 being low, right? 562 inventors again. And look at that graph. A very small part of the population owns all the betweenness centrality, okay? And in fact, we took the highest 30. That's 5%. 30 out of 562, right? And when it highlighted them in red, what do you see? You see that they span the entire network. Pretty amazing, right? These 30 people are what connects your innovation network. So as leaders, when you ask yourself, who do I need to talk to find out about my network and how it's working and what I could do to improve it, you don't have to talk to 562 inventors, right? You've got 30 people that really know what's going on. Yes, sir?
I'm just curious, how fast does the diagram on the right change? I mean, if you come back next year,
Different.
Is it all different, hence the 20%, your 20% rule doesn't really last over time?
And actually,
They're always changing.
we looked at Carter-Rock over time, and it applies over all time. It's always a small fraction, this 5 to 20% of people that span the network. The shape of the network, right? And who plays the role of the innovation backbone morphs over time, okay? Because people come and go, right? And that changes over time. But this general rule that a small fraction of all your inventors, okay, are in fact the backbone holds. And we've looked at 6 laboratories, half a dozen commercial companies, and we've looked at them over periods of from 5 years to 50 years.
But that 20 is changing fast.
Who they are, you mean?
Yeah.
No, it's changing over a career time, all right? So over a period of 20 years or so, okay, that's when it changes, all right? And in fact, the ones that are identified today as the backbone, when we went and interviewed 36 of them from 5 of the Navy laboratories, they helped us identify who are the up-and-coming backbone people, because remember, using patents, you have about a 4 or 5 year delay. Even if it's published after 18 months, it usually doesn't get granted until somewhere between 3 to 5 years, okay? And so one of the things you can do by knowing the current innovation backbone is find out who tomorrow's backbone is, and how should I manage their careers, right? And how should I reward and recognize them for being this connecting agent? Next. Okay, so this is it. So who are they, right? So we went and we did actually 6 Navy labs. With 5 of the labs, we interviewed 36 of the highest betweenness centrality people, the backbone people, right? And what did we find out? There were 2 types. One type was they were the absolute subject matter expert, right? Okay, and people came to them because, boy, if I have a problem in nano, I go to Terry Kraft because he's Mr. Nano. He knows everything there is to know about nano, right? Or the second kind was owners of key technical capabilities, right? Like Dr. Eric Snow, who owned the nanotechnology lab at the Naval Research Laboratory. Okay, if you want to do any experiments in nano, you got to work with him. So he was a center, all right? Now the other type were the internal entrepreneurs, and this we found very interesting, okay? Because these were the people who really were unusual for techies, right? Let's face it, geeks don't like to talk to other people, right? We like to look at our shoe tips, we like to read books, we like that kind of stuff, right? But we don't like to go out and socialize, okay? These were the geeks who also had a high social component, right? And these were the people that went out, talked to the customers, found out what their problems were, right? Found us the sponsor that had money, right? Came back to the laboratory, took that money, took that problem, built a network of experts, okay? And took that network of experts and solved the problem. These are really important people in your organization. And then later on, I'm going to explain why this is related to working capital funding. Okay, next one. Oh, by the way, see that last line? They are the trusted influencers. They are the people that if you want to propagate a new policy and you get them to buy into it, you get them to help you create it, you get them to help you propagate it, everybody else falls in line. Because If he or she says that, I believe it because of my past experience with them, all right? Okay, next slide. How can the backbone help? We've kind of been talking about this, so I'll just let you read through those when you have time later on. But one of the things I'd like to point out at the bottom is mentors. When we talk to these people about why they were successful in the Navy, almost without an exception, they had a story about a mentor, about somebody who took them when they first came into the Navy, and rather than exposing them to all of the policies and processes and the complications, walked them through it and protected them for a period of time, a year, 2 years, something like that, right? And showed them the ropes. That was really important. We had other people that told us, yeah, they gave me a phone book, tell me to find an office and sit down, and they didn't do quite as well, all right? Next slide. Okay. How can the backbone help? We've kind of talked about this already. These are the people that understand innovation. They can help you design the new policies and programs, okay? And they can help you propagate it back out. Next slide. Okay, so how will you manage your backbone, right? This is going to be really important because these people leave. They retire. They find other positions, okay? We promote them to a level that they're no good anymore, right? The Peter principle, all right? So what are you going to do with these folks? We have an example in Spain where somebody had 152 patents, right? What did they do to the guy? They promoted him into a management position. Now, why? Because they couldn't reward him anymore in the path that he was going. They couldn't increase his pay anymore. They couldn't increase his level anymore, right? So he had to go into a management position. This is wrong. Now, we should have a way of keeping these truly superstars in their technical positions and rewarding them enough that they want to stay there, okay? All right, let's move on to the next slide. So questions. Go away tonight and think about this, right? How would you engage these people? If you can identify them, and you can through social network analysis, you can name them. I can tell you in 6 Navy labs who they are by name, right? What would you do? How would you engage them to help you to understand innovation, to help you understand what would increase innovation or what would hurt innovation, and to help you define the management interventions, the leadership actions that would make a difference, right? Secondly, what are you going to do about these people, right? How about having them identify for you tomorrow's backbone? How about managing those careers in a different way? How about writing their performance plan so that you grow their experience as part of the backbone? Okay? Think about this tonight. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about the third concept, knowledge propagation. We talked about the network model. We talked about the innovation backbone. Now let's talk about knowledge propagation. And how do you want to think about it when it comes to a network metaphor? Okay? So I'd like you to think about it, and I know this sounds negative, but I mean it in a positive way. I want you to think about knowledge as a contagion, right? About a great idea, like a virus, okay? What could we do to enable the spread of that intellectual virus? What could we do to make it propagate across our organization? I have so many examples of great ideas from this part of a Navy lab and great ideas from this part of the Navy lab, which were a different part of it, which were almost identical. And we've wasted effort, right? Because we both solved the same problem the same way. We didn't have to, okay? We could have solved it once and the knowledge had propagated, okay? All right, let's go on to the next one. So how do you measure that in terms of networks? There's a property of networks that's called the greatest connected component. The way you calculate that is very simple. I start with inventor 1, and I ask, who is she connected to? And then I take all the people that she's connected to, and I say, this second person here, who is he connected to? And I connect them all the way out and all the way out until there's nobody left to connect, because they don't connect to anybody else, right? When you do that analysis on this particular network, what you find is that of the 562 inventors, you have 69 connected groups. 40 of them are lone inventors. The largest component is 430 people. I'm going outside the box again, a point. 430 people, right? That's a pretty big component. It turns out to be 77% of this corporation, okay? That's great. You know what we found in Navy labs? Varied from a high of 51% to a low of 6%. You know what it means to be at 6%? It means you are a collection of caves. Cavemen. Everybody's going, sounds right. Cavemen, right? That get great ideas, but never share them with anybody. How much value are you going to create if in your cave you invent some new knowledge and you don't share it? The answer is minimal value. Yes, sir.
Sir, if you looked at, this is now the Navy, but have you looked at all the other services and all the other great and similar type of projects we're working on if nobody knows about it?
Yeah, the answer is no, not yet. We're starting to look at different organizations, all right? We've looked at about a half a dozen companies, commercial companies. This is one of them, all right? We've looked at Boeing, we've looked at Caterpillar and a couple of others. What we find typically, and this is on a small sample size, half a dozen Navy labs, half a dozen companies, all right, is that the connected component in industry is usually a lot larger, okay? And I think that's a positive thing for them. They're doing a better job of propagating knowledge across the organization. Have we looked at the Air Force or the Army? No, we haven't, because we're funded for this particular activity by N9, by Garth Jensen, all right? And that's not his focus right now, okay? But we'd love to do that, yes, yes, sir.
Did you look at any of the root causal analysis behind that and whether it
Yeah.
was related to security?
Yes, yeah, and I'm gonna tell you about that as we go forward, because what we did was when we saw these things in 5 labs, okay, because we had done 5 labs and then we went and did Newark afterwards. When we did these 5 laboratories, we said, well, what could cause this? I mean, it's one thing to say the network shows us something, it's another thing to understand why, okay? And when you looked at things, I'll jump ahead, and I'll tell you very, very quickly, and then I'll get into it some more. One of the root causes for a low connected component is working capital funding. Not that working capital funding is bad. Customer focus is the right focus, all right? But the way it's been implemented in the Navy, every individual researcher and engineer goes after his or her own money. And so it creates a Lord of the Flies culture in which I am not going to share with you because I need to get that money and I need to have unique knowledge to convince the sponsor that I'm the one that should get the money and not you. And in fact, I was telling the Admiral that we had one situation in NRL where an individual researcher was competing with his immediate manager for the same funds for that year's funding. How dysfunctional is that? Okay? So I'm here to tell you, there's nothing wrong with the intent of working capital funding. It's how you implemented it. And industry implements the same thing, but in a different way. They have special people that are up there raising the funds while the researchers and scientists are down there doing what they're good at doing. Yes, sir?
Just to put this in a different context, if I might. I mean, maybe it's your company that does this, I don't know.
Mhm.
But every year in the time frame of January or February, if you, a certain company, again, maybe it's yours, publishes who are the best innovators in the world. And the last 3 years, the Navy labs have ranked very high,
Mhm.
5, 5, and 8.
Yeah.
Which implies that, you know, whatever we're doing in these labs, we're doing it very well.
You are.
Okay, so that's the other context I wanted to
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. Number one, it's not my company, okay? Wish it were. Number two, to your point, the Navy labs are very innovative, okay? But that doesn't mean you can't be better at it. And you're gonna have to be better at it with sequestration coming and with the competition from people like the Chinese, okay? Because they've got the mass action law in their favor, right? For every scientist we've got, they've got 100, okay? And they can afford to be wasteful.
Now,
Yes, sir?
just let me repeat that. That's 5, 5, and 8 in the whole world.
Yeah.
That's pretty.
My point to Admiral Kraft is you have phenomenal intellectual property. Why aren't you licensing it to generate more revenue? That, by the way, licensing revenue is not under the purview of Congress, as I understand it. Therefore, you can actually logically apply it to something that you want to do, right? Like research. And, you know, to me, I'm just flabbergasted every time I talk to one of the licensing groups, why they're not more aggressive. I just can't understand. Yes, sir.
So, you know, in this current fiscal environment, I guess my question is that going to force us to increase our connected components simply because we need to combine funding and other things to get at things? We've observed a little bit of that, you know, over the past year. Could that be a bit of a forcing function on the good side?
Yeah, exactly. Why did IBM change? Because in 1991, we went through a catastrophe. Why does anybody change? Because you hit a brick wall. You've got a problem, a crisis, okay? When things are going well, do you change? No, you just steam forward, right? So this is an opportunity. This is not a glass half empty. This is a glass half full. And the job is how we figure out how to fill the whole glass with what they leave us after sequestration. And yes, that's right, more connectivity. I'm going to show you a chart, the genotype chart, that shows that in every one of those 5 laboratories, there's tremendous overlap in terms of where they invent, right? And yet, when we looked at several thousand patents, we did not find one instance of cross-laboratory invention. Why? You know? And the answer I got when we did the interviews is, well, I don't have a funding line to charge my conversation with Admiral Kraft here because I'm over here in ONR and he's down here in NWDC and there's no funding line to let me do that. Okay, it's that simple. Guys, it boils down to the policies that you implement. And they're well-intended. I'm not saying they aren't well-intended. It's just that you need to study the unanticipated consequences of what you implement, all right? Okay, so long story short is, oh, by the way, one other thing on this graph, what the guys did was they took the nodes and they scaled the diameter of the nodes by the betweenness centrality. See, look at that person there, right? Take that person out, oh my God, what happens, right?
Single point failure.
Yes, exactly, a single point of failure, right? And yet I can tell you, because we talk to these folks, there's nothing in that person's performance plan that motivates him to keep doing that job, right? He just does it because he loves bouncing back and forth. Let's go to the next one. This is a Navy example of this single point of failure, right? This happens to be the weapons division of NAVAIR, all right, China Lake. So it turns out that this happens to be a very prolific group up here, right? 4.6 inventors per patent. They all had about 20-some inventions, okay? 13 US class codes. So they're spread all over the place. This is the main building that does weapons systems, okay? Out here, this group, also very prolific, this group on the right, going outside the box again, guys, warning. All right, this group out here on the right is the group that was out. If you've ever been to China Lake, there's a building about 2 or 3 miles out in the desert where the guys play around with the highly energetic chemistry. You know, the compound's the love potion number 9 that goes boom, right? Well, and you might say, well, no wonder nobody wants to network to them. But there was this guy here, his name was Ron Henry. Now, by the way, he only had 7 patents. So having high betweenness centrality doesn't necessarily mean you have a lot of patents. The other guys had twice as many, okay? He had only 7 patents, but Ron Henry was this guy that linked those two organizations. Look at him, he's the corpus callosum of WD's brain, the 2 halves of WD's brain, right? He worked for 35 years, came back for 10 years in retirement at $1 a day. That's how dedicated this guy was, right? And nobody ever replaced him. Today, you will not find a single instance of collaboration between those two organizations, at least in the patent database. I'm not saying there isn't other forms of collaboration, right? Why did we miss this? Because we didn't have a way, a mental model, of visualizing our capacity as a network and finding these key choke points. Okay, next. Here's what I'd like you to think about. All right, can you identify 2 or more relatively disjoint components? Don't laugh now, because I know you got a whole list here, right? In your organization, right? And what would you do to build a trusted, keyword, bridge between those components? All right, think about it. Next. All right, so let's talk about another biological metaphor, the genotype. The genotype determines the animal, okay? Given a certain genotype, you are going to end up producing an animal that can run so fast, leap so high, eat so much, and so on, okay? Now, interesting, in Scientific American there's a recent article about how the environment affects genotype, believe it or not, and how over many generations, an environment causes you to breed a new animal, change your genotype, okay? Well, your environment's changing, right? You got sequestration, you got the Chinese coming at you, you've got different types of warfare now, you're going from classic to asymmetric to cyber, right? Totally different environment from 50 years ago, which was much more stable, okay? How are you going to change your genotype? So let's take a look at, what's the analogy for an innovation network? Next slide, please. Okay, sorry for the eye chart. Maybe when you print it out, you'll be able to read this a little better. What we've got here is on the y-axis is the number of patents. On the x-axis are the USPTO, Patent and Trademark Office, classification codes. What is this invention about? Is it about a buggy whip? Is it about nuclear physics? Is it about, electric engines? Okay. And what we plotted here for the 5 laboratories, NAVAIR, AD, WD, SPAWAR, NRL, and Carderock, right? We plotted their genotypes, the number of inventions that they have. This is an expression. It says they have people that are genes, right, that can express new knowledge, that's the genotype, the animal, right, in a specific category, okay? Now, here's what I expect you to get out of this graph, right? Look at it. It's like a spectrum analysis, right? And what it's telling you is where you have your strengths and where you have your weaknesses. By the way, if you read down all of these codes, you'd find almost nothing having to do with nanotechnology, metamaterials, directed energy, autonomy, all right? Are they slightly important to you in the future? Yeah, right? So where are you going to add those genes, okay? We did a study just now for AD on nanotechnology-enabled battery innovations. And what we found was one invention in the Navy, okay? We found hundreds of them outside the Navy. And so what we're doing is we're mapping those external innovation networks, and we're figuring out who are the centers of those networks so that they can go out, tap those people, invite them in to give a talk, and drain their brains, pick their brains, right? Find out what's going on. And maybe through a CRADA or other mechanism, link up to them to increase their innovation genotype. Okay. I don't know how you're going to get your genotype. You may not use PETs, you may use something else. But just the concept, the fact that you have a genotype in your network is what's important, right? Next slide. And so, you know, what are the classes you need to invent in tomorrow? Okay, how will you get those classes? Will it be through training? Will it be through hiring? Will it be through creators and other mechanisms to link to them? Okay, next slide, please. Okay? And so here's what I want you to think about tonight. Okay, what information would you use to characterize your genotype? What's appropriate for where you are, whether it's acquisition, in service, or R&D or S&T, right? And how would you determine the requirements for tomorrow's genotype? Where would you start? Would you start with your strategic plans? Would you start with crowdsourcing ideas about what tomorrow's genotype should look like? You know, where would you start? Okay? All right, next slide. All right, so we're getting up towards the end here. So culture trumps strategy and leadership. This was the conclusion of Booz Allen and Company in their 2011 study. All right, large study they did, and I think it's really important because you know you can lead all you want, you can manage all you want. By and large, that's 10%. Okay, the 90% is what the people do when you're not looking over them. Right, that's what really makes a difference. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. What's the culture? Well, if you want to go back to Primitive Culture, written by Edward B. Tyler in 1871. It's the collective set of behavior patterns that your organization exhibits, right? That's what a culture is. Where does that culture reside? Next slide, right? In your heads. It's part of your tacit knowledge, right? If you really want to dig down into this, and I won't do it deeply here, our tacit knowledge is comprised of two major components. Our cognitive, which is our collection of metaphors, analogies, and mental models, right? That's why I act. And our technical, which is a collection of our crafts, our skills, and our know-how. That's how I react, okay? Together, they form our learned behavior patterns, okay? Next slide. So what are you going to do about it? Well, one thing we can pick on is the cognitive part, right? We can say to ourselves, okay, what are the metaphors we use? Right? Think of some powerful metaphors you've heard of before, such as war on cancer, right? What does it do? The power of the metaphor is in what it reveals and what it hides. And war on cancer says, I want to take an aggressive stance in fighting cancer, right? And so then I start drawing some analogies. Well, like maybe irradiating a brain tumor is kind of like attacking a castle that's got a moat around it and only a couple of drawbridges, right? Well, how would I attack that castle? I'm not going to take all of my troops and move them down one drawbridge. It might collapse, right? Or also be a point of failure. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take multiple groups of troops and I'm going to send them down the different drawbridges. Well, then when you start getting to the model, that's the model of irradiation of a brain tumor. They use multiple beams of low intensity to sum up where they intersect at the tumor. Okay, that's how we think about things. So the metaphors you pick are really important. Next slide. Okay, I love this one. How many of you have used the metaphor swim lane in talking to others? How many? Please don't ever do it again. All right. I could not think of a worse metaphor for creativity, collaboration, innovation. Nothing could be worse. You could even use crew team and it would be better. At least you're all pulling in one direction. At least 5 or 6 of you are pulling in one direction, all right? But we got to get some other metaphors, and I'm not suggesting that the basketball team is the right metaphor. You have to think about what those metaphors are in your domain, all right? But please, look at the words you use because they trigger mental associations in the minds of your people, and that determines what they're going to see and not see, all right? So you definitely want to watch out for your metaphors. Next one. Policy. Why is policy important to your culture? Well, because a policy defines a set of actions, right? A set of actions is collective behavior patterns. Collective behavior patterns is your culture again, okay? Good policy and bad policy. Next slide. So now I'm going to get really geeky on you guys. So you're going to bear with me, all right? And the geeky part is this. Network theory can actually help you figure out whether you got good policy or bad policy, right? The fundamental building blocks of any network, no matter how big it is, any social network is called a triad. You get 3 people together, right? And now you've got a plethora of potential relationships between 3 people, okay? And you've got 2 stable formations. Friends are friends, all right? A is friends of B, B is friends of C, C is friends of A. Or common enemy, which politicians use all the time, and so do we when we're leading a group, right? What do we do in the military? We've got a common enemy, right? So B and C had the common enemy A, and so B and C collaborate with each other. Now there's 2 unstable forms. One is deal with the devil, and we see this a lot in politics in the Middle East, right? And that is everybody hates everybody, but I'll team up with you right now so I can stick it to the other guy. Those are unstable because as soon as we stick it to the other guy, we're enemies and we fight each other. Well, the last one is the basis of all these vampire novels and probably every TV program you've ever seen, and romantic TV program. It's called the Lover's Triangle, right? B and C both want A, and A is going to decide which one wins and which one loses. And the one that wins is really happy, and the one that loses wants to kill the other one, all right? So, these are the four formations, too stable, too unstable. Let's see how they apply to policy. Next slide. Here you go. Working capital funding. I will tell you, that is a lover's triangle, right? A is the funding source. B and C are the two people or two groups or two organizations that are competing for that same funding. Only one is going to win in our current WCF implementation. Only one. That means B will not cooperate with C, and C will not collaborate with B. That is why we see such low connectivity. One of the primary reasons, not the only one, one of the primary reasons we see such low connectivity, right, across Navy laboratories, right? Totally dysfunctional. Nothing wrong with the concept of WCF to be focused on the customer. You need to think about how you implement it. And it's amazing. I'll be really happy to see what happens after talking to this group, because every time I talk about this, I feel like I'm talking about the third rail of the Navy. Nobody wants to attack this problem because Congress has edited the WCF, right? But I don't think they told you how to implement it, did they? So you have that power. All right, let's go to a good example. Good example. Next one. Dr. Eric Snow, Nanotechnology Laboratory, NRL. He takes his 219 funds and he will not accept a proposal. He will not fund it unless it involves multiple organizations across NRL. Right? NRL had the highest connectivity of all the labs, 51%. Now, is it solely because of him? No. But I can guarantee you this policy helped. Okay? So think about the triads that you are enforcing when you implement a policy. Next slide. Questions, right? What are the behavior patterns you want to promote? You've got to figure that out, right? What metaphors would you use to promote them? And then how would you change or implement policies to support that? It's not hard, but it takes some time to think through it, all right? It's not rocket science. Next slide. Disruptive innovation, last topic. Really quick, because I know I'm over my hour probably, right? Disruptive innovation, next slide. Your culture is both your strength and your weakness, right? What do I mean by that? Because if I have a shared mental model, which makes us very powerful, look at the Marines, right? That shared mental model, no man left behind, and so on, okay? It makes you extremely powerful, but what it does is it opens you up to disruption because something called cognitive dissonance. This is a human factor that says, if you give me information that goes counter to my mental model, the first thing I try to do is ignore it. If you keep persisting with this information that goes counter to my mental model, the next thing I do is look for other information that supports it so that there's 5 supports and only 1 against, right? Statistics. Okay? The last thing I do is to change my mental model. Why? It means I change my beliefs. Okay? Very, very tough to do. That's why when you look at disruptive innovations, if you study them closely, they don't happen overnight. Disruptive innovations happen over many, many years, right in front of the incumbent. But the incumbent refuses to see. That's what makes them so disruptive, because sooner or later you reach the tipping point. Yes, sir.
Sir, do Navy labs, any of the Navy labs work with other service labs?
Yeah, they do, and they'll work with DARPA and other things like that, because contractually it causes them to do that collaboration, right? So that's an interesting model. The CRADA model is another interesting model for collaboration, for fostering collaboration, right? There are good positive models out there, a lot of them. The thing that we found when we interviewed the 36 people, though, is that almost without exception, when we asked what impedes your collaboration with other organizations within your laboratory and across laboratories, the first thing everybody mentioned was WCF, right? I have no funding line to charge that activity to, therefore, I'm not going to do it, right? Believe it or not, this is the irony of the whole thing. We're working now with NAVAIR, and Gary Kessler, who's their top civilian, said, I want to increase collaboration between AD and WD. So we launched this program, we defined how we're going to do it. We're going to do it with nanotechnology, inventions of batteries, which are important to both. All of a sudden it stops. Why does it stop? WD says, well, I haven't got any more 2013 money left, and there's no line item there for collaboration with AD. Is that ironic? Come on.
Same organization.
Yeah, but different funds.
Yeah.
They can't even share the 219 funding. I didn't even realize that.
I know Garrett, I bet that drives him crazy.
Oh, that drives me absolutely nuts, okay? Absolutely nuts, all right? Okay, I think we're on to just about the last slide. Oh, okay, so just to link it back to Nonaka's work, right? You know, our cognitive and our technical knowledge, those are your beliefs and your competencies. Click it once more, please. And believe it or not, that's what's going to drive you for disruption. Okay? Last slide. I believe it's the last one. So what are your organization's strongly held beliefs? What are the things that you say are inviolate? I will not violate those beliefs, okay? List them. Make a list of them, right? Then what are the competencies that separate you from everybody else, that you do better than anybody else? List those. Then ask yourself a simple question. The red team guy, which of those can he violate? Can he violate my beliefs? Can he violate my competencies? Doesn't matter how big you are. Look at Kodak, right? What were Kodak's beliefs? Film forever. That's our business model, right? What were the competencies? Chemistry up the wazoo. By the way, they had one of the initial patents on digital cameras. Okay? One of the initial patents on digital cameras. What happened? This was their culture, right? And little pipsqueaks came up and attacked, and by the time they saw it, it was right in front of them the whole time. By the time they reacted to it, changed their mental model. It's too late. Way too late. Almost happened to IBM with the PC. Okay.
Well, that's
Yes,
the
sir.
innovator's dilemma.
Yes, it is.
Large companies tend to want to keep going in the direction they're going, and they let customers define and drive what
Yeah.
they're doing. And as long as they're meeting the customer's needs, they define themselves as successful.
Yeah.
Kodak was meeting its customers' needs of better and better film. But in the meantime, something was sneaking in under the tent,
Yep.
changed everything, and they
Yeah.
couldn't account for it.
And it wasn't even sneaking, and it was there in broad daylight, all right? But they couldn't see it because it didn't fit their mental models. We recently created a class for the last SSG that looked at Christensen's work, Forrester's work, and Everett Rogers' work. And those are three different models of disruptive innovation, right? You look at all of them, and you can boil them down to this. You can boil them down to an innovation that's a collection of technologies and concepts of use of those technologies, right? Like the difference between using aircraft to be spotters for big guns off of the aircraft carrier or have them deliver the ordnance. Same technology, two different concepts of use, okay? One is business as usual, the other is disruption, okay? You can go through all of those, and you'll see that every one of the examples that they give, you can identify what the beliefs and competencies were that were violated. So if you take all, in fact, we did, for the Marines in Camp Lejeune, we did an exercise where they wanted to show how wonderful Blue Force tracking was and how the red team could never, ever understand what their teams were doing compared to what they could do, right? In 2 weeks' time, we put together a collection of smartphones, Bing Maps, Microsoft SharePoint, and a small piece of software code that took for the red team, took this cell phone, taped to their vest, right? And every 15 seconds, sent a picture up to the cloud, right, with a GPS location. And they could send text messages on top of that. We were able to map that using SharePoint and Bing Maps so that the red team commander on his laptop, in his tent, had as good, almost as good, right, knowledge, situational awareness as the Blue Force tracking gave our team, right? In the end, the red team had to stand out in the road before the blue team could get them. And the camp and the Lejeune County Police Force, they were involved in this, asked us if they could buy the system. And we said, here, this is what it is, go buy it from Kmart, go buy this. All right? So you can do it. You just have to understand what your opponent believes and what the competencies are. Why does that give you a window of opportunity? It gives you a window of opportunity because your beliefs and your competencies are embedded in what? People. And people don't change overnight. It takes time. That gives you, the enemy, a window to disrupt you. Okay? I think we have the last slide. That's it. So I'm sorry if I ran over. Okay? But if there are any other questions, please feel free to either email me or ask them now, and I'm willing to stay and answer for as long as you like.